Hello! I'm going to rank all of the game dev tasks, at least the ones I do on a day-to-day basis, from my most favorite things to my least favorite things. Now, of course, this is all very subjective. This is just the things that I personally really enjoy or don't enjoy. But I thought it'd be fun and maybe informative as well as to all the different things that the owner of a small independent game studio has to do day to day. All right, so here is the tiers I made here. We've got our 5 tiers. We've got the things I love that I'm just absolutely passionate about and sort of the reason I do this work, and then the things that I really do not like, but I have to do anyway. So these are all in a random order, and these are just sort of the things that I thought of to categorize. And the first one we have is content programming. So this is like basically implementing quests, adding the actual content to the game, the things that the player does. We're not talking about systems programming here. That's different. Systems programming would be like, your save load system, or maybe, the jump system or something like that. We're talking about specific content. And we make very content-oriented games, so there's a lot of this. And this, I actually don't like that very much. I don't love content programming, and I suspect a lot of programmers don't like content programming because we've got a lot of half-finished games where all the systems are done and they feel like, well, we're pretty close. We just need all the content. Turns out content programming is kind of the slog. The systems programming I find is kind of the fun part, at least for me. And I think a lot of other programmers are like that as well. Okay, next up, we've got writing. You've got like item descriptions, lore text, and then of course you have character dialogue. I really enjoy writing. I don't do a lot of it myself these days, mostly partner Jacqueline does most of the writing. Okay, next we have systems programming. So that's what I was talking about before. Systems programming is, well, the systems of the game. And you can have all the systems of the game coded, or at least you can feel like they're all coded. When you actually start making content, you find that you didn't actually have the systems coded. You need to account for all of these things that you didn't think about before. And I find that content programming often sort of ends up, you've got to make a lot of changes to your systems as well. And maybe that's why content programming feels like a little bit more of a slog. It's also just kind of exciting, when you're making new shiny systems. It feels like a blank slate. And content programming is sort of dealing with all the baggage that you've created with your architecture and stuff. So I think that systems programming is super fun. I'm going to put it in love. I absolutely love systems programming, especially when you start with like the data structure for stuff. You're just like writing in like, okay, what kinds of data do we need to make this? For some reason, that really speaks to me. Okay, next up, we've got bug fixing. Now, this one's interesting because normally I freaking hate it. So I'm not gonna go super extreme. I'm gonna put this one in loathsome. Interestingly, some of the highest highs of game development are fixing a long-standing bug. And maybe that's because it's so loathsome that when you do finally fix that bug that is long-standing, maybe for weeks or months or even years in some cases, man, it is a good high. But for the most part, it's not very fun, at least for me. Some people like this, which is good because we need those bugs fixed. Okay, next is 3D art. Now this happens to be my forte. This is my background. I'm a career 3D artist, and this is what I did before I went indie. I was actually a AAA 3D artist. I absolutely love 3D art. We're talking about making models, UV unwrapping, texturing, making buildings, making characters, whatever. I like making environments the best, but 3D art, absolutely love 3D art. If I had to compare it to systems programming, and this is kind of rare, someone who does both of these things, I would say that programming in general is more addictive. It's like there's little breadcrumbs to sort of keep you going along the way. Just like, okay, a couple more lines, and then you get to check it and see like, okay, now that's working. And that's very addictive. But for me, the payoff for 3D art, even though it's less addictive in the moment, when I do make something beautiful that is evocative, that for me is like the best feeling. So 2D art, I'm going to put in enjoyable. I'm not really so much a 2D artist. I do end up doing 2D art from time to time, especially with the game we're making now, which is sort of a bunch of 2D illustrations in a 3D world. I do end up drawing things every now and again. And of course, back when I was making a 3D game, this would have been textures and things like that. So it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable. I like it. Okay, next we have systems design. So systems design is what it sounds like, right? You're dreaming up the systems of the game and writing design docs. I really think that that's at least when it comes to design, I feel like that's where the rubber meets the road. You're writing a document for someone to implement. If you're not going to code it yourself, and somebody else needs to code it, then you're writing out very, very specifically what needs to happen. It's not just like, oh yeah, and then there's going to be like a spell system or something like that. No. You've got to write out exactly what it is, where are the hooks, what little bits of UI are there, what happens when you click this particular button, what happens when you click this particular button when you're in this particular game state, all of the nuts and bolts here. Systems design. Ooh, let's go with, sometimes systems design, in theory it's fun, but when you start doing it, you start really having to work out the nuts and bolts. For me, I'm gonna go with tolerable, and that might be sacrilegious because that might sound like the most fun thing in the world, systems design, especially if you're sort of idea prone, but that's just me. So the next one we have is content design. And content design is like quest writing. So this is the actual, the stories in the game that the player does. And of course, this will vary from game to game. Obviously, if you're making like a puzzle game, then content design would be making puzzles. But in our case, we make games full of characters and full of quests and full of small stories. So content design generally manifests in the form of making quests. I absolutely love making quests. I love it so much. I love thinking of the high idea for the quest. I love thinking of the moment the player encounters the quest. I love thinking of what would be cool, basically, like what would be really cool. You turn this corner and what does the player find, and how do we set up this quest, and what would be super novel and memorable. Just one of my favorite parts of making video games, at least the kinds of games that we make. All right, so we've got a whole bunch of different things. Like I said, owner of a small independent video game studio, so I end up doing, I think, just about everything, a little bit of everything. I used to do really everything, and now we've got a few more people. We've got 3 full-timers and then a few contractors. So the sort of ratios of things I do are sort of sliding around. But this is one I suspect I'll always do, and that's business admin, accounting, and taxes. Of course, you probably could have guessed that I was going to put that in the absolute bottom category, and I think that's probably true for a lot of artists and creative types. Yeah, I don't love that stuff, but very important, and you got to do it. And for anyone who has not run a business before, this is like, well, at the beginning, you've got like business setup and, starting your company, whether that's an LLC or a corporation or something like that. Then, of course, you have this ongoing work of keeping track of your taxes, keeping track of your accounting, of your deductions and things like that. And then you might have also monthly royalties you need to be issuing. So you need to be going around and finding the exact amounts there. It's very careful work, right? You can't mess this up. And it's pretty tedious, and it's constant, and it's forever. So not my favorite. Next, we have platform store admin. So if you've never shipped a game, there's a whole lot of little bitty things you have to do to get the game onto the store, to open a partner account with the platform, to maintain the game on the store, whether that's like engaging in particular discounts and things like that, or anytime the store or platform makes a change to like sort of image formats, things like that. There's all these different images you have to do. There's your main capsule, there's your thumbnail, all the different like aspect ratios of where your game will show up in the store. You have to create those and maintain all those. I guess sort of like graphic design work as well, but I kind of lump all this stuff into just like store administration. I'm going to put that in the kill me category. I really don't enjoy doing it. It's incredibly important, right? Particularly, the capsules and the artwork you do is incredibly important. And then just also like marketing copy, right? What goes in the description, updating that, dealing with localized versions of that, getting all the bits of text you need localized. And this is not localization work. I've never done localization work. I only speak English. This is just like the administration of localization work, of just like, getting all your ducks in a row, figuring out what strings you need to send off. Okay, next we have community and social media. So that's going to be a very different thing depending on particular studio's brand. In our case, I've been really on the YouTube thing. Now that's not making the videos. I have that in a different category. I've got content marketing somewhere in here. Here it is, content marketing. But community, social media, I think of like responding to emails, responding to tweets, responding to, YouTube comments, things like that. Just general interacting with the community. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it doesn't really feel like getting things done. I think it's an important part of having a brand and, being someone who makes products that people buy, and, people want to talk to you, and people want to have a connection. So it's important stuff. And of course, I get to read some of the lovely things people say about our games. And that's always really nice. But I also have to read some of the, shall we say, less than lovely things that people say either about our games or about content that I make that I put out on YouTube or put out on Reddit or whatever. And that part I don't like. I don't think anybody likes that. Okay, so next we have B2B, which stands for business to business. That's basically any time you are dealing with a business that you are contracting. So this could be like localization. This could be like dealing with a PR firm if you've hired one. If you have like an external art outsourcing house or something like that. Just anytime you're dealing with another business, there's a certain level of liaison that needs to happen. You need to assign them the work, tell them what to do. You need to talk about, what the cost is going to be, how that's going to be paid, and all that sort of stuff. So basically any sort of communication, interactions you're having with other businesses, calling that B2B, at least on this chart. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and put it in maybe between loathsome and kill me. I think I'm just going to go with loathsome. We work with some great folks, great partners, but the work itself, well, what can I say? It's not, it's not creative. It's just a means to an end. Next, we've got screenshots and trailers. So here I'm talking about the creation of all of your marketing assets you're making for the game. So these are screenshots that go on your Steam page or on your, your store pages and whatnot. This is your trailer. I'm thinking of the editing of your trailer, the picking of your shots, the planning of your shots, potentially even the high level design of what your trailer is going to be and sort of shot lists of what you actually have to author. It's very significant. It's an incredibly important part of selling games, how you're going to present your game and what you're going to show. So it's a really big thing. So this one I'm going to put in loathsome. And even though it's really exciting when you have something really cool to show and you're sort of coming to the point where you're ready to show it, it's really exciting to be like taking that final screenshot. I find it very, I'll say sometimes I can get a little bit frozen by all the possibilities of like, is this the best possible shot that we can get? Like, is there some little thing that we could work on, make something look just a little bit better or just a slightly different angle or something like that, that would present, just a little bit better, just make this screenshot just a tiny bit better. And that, for whatever reason, just is very mentally exhausting. And maybe it leads to sort of better, more polished looking stuff. I don't actually know. I think that our marketing assets, they do look pretty good in the end. But yeah, I don't like that feeling. I like much more working on the player experience, deliberating over what is the best way to present the idea of what the player experience is going to be. For whatever reason, that's just not as fun to me. So the next one is playtesting. And this one's interesting because for our last game, which is called Eastshade, which is a open world adventure game where you play as a traveling artist, playtesting would have definitely been in the kill me column. I absolutely hated testing Eastshade. It was such an important part of making the game, as it always is when you're working on a game, but it's also so mentally exhausting, especially when you're playtesting as a designer. It's one thing to be playtesting just looking for bugs, but when you're playtesting as a designer, your brain has to be incredibly on, and you almost have to be an actor in that you have to try to get yourself into the mental state of what a player might be thinking. And it's really hard, especially when you're really close to the game and you just had a hand in every single part of it. I just find it very exhausting. And especially, toward the end of development after I had played the game, who even knows how many times, I just found the idea of starting up the game and actually playing it, there's just a really high amount of friction there, and it just sounded like a terrible task. But now, on our new game, Songs of Glimmerwick, I am not the lead designer of that game, Jacqueline is, and she writes the majority of the quests and just makes the majority of the content, or at least designs the majority of the content. Now it's much more fun for me because I feel like more easily able to immerse myself in the game. I also think this new game, Songs of Glimmerwick, it's a bit more systemic than Eastshade was. Of course, it is very content driven as well, but because it has a little bit more of a systemic nature, I guess I find it easier to truly get into the game in a way that I actually have never gotten for Eastshade. I've never really been, I would say, sucked into the game. Whereas with Glimmerwick, I have been sucked into the game actually multiple times, even on multiple playthroughs of the game, which is really wonderful to actually be able to get sucked into the game, as a player might. So I'm going to go ahead and put that one in loathsome. That one's been upgraded from kill me. So maybe it depends on the kind of game you're making. And maybe it depends on how much of a hand you had in all of the pieces of content. Not sure. Or maybe it depends on the type of person. I don't know. So next one is content marketing. And for that, at the moment, is mostly our YouTube channel. I kind of like making the YouTube videos. It's kind of fun. It's easy to get sucked into, kind of addictive. It's really easy just to burn 3 days. But I would say for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel anywhere near as rewarding as actually working on the game, like doing 3D art or programming systems or something like that. So I'm going to put it in tolerable. So even though it's quite fun and addictive to do, I have a really easy time like getting sucked into the work. It doesn't feel as rewarding to me. When I do have finally finished a video, I'm excited to upload it. And then when I upload it, people start watching it, and maybe it's because there's just so much negativity on the internet as well. It's not always fun to see all the feedback from it, and then have to move on back and be creative again and get sucked back into actually working on the game. Sort of a different brain state, and maybe I don't really enjoy that switch so much. Okay, the next one is delegation, and of course this will completely depend on the size of your studio. In our case, there's just 3 of us, so there's not really much delegation to do. Mostly delegation for me at the moment. We have 1 full-time programmer. It's just sort of encapsulating exactly what she needs to do, and sometimes writing a little bit of a short document on things to keep in mind, or maybe the best way to get it done or something. And I used to really dislike delegation, at least on Eastshade, but now I think because our programmer is so good at what she does, it makes it much more enjoyable to actually delegate. So that I'm going to go tolerable. I definitely would have had that lower maybe like 4 years ago, but she makes it fun because she's so good at what she does. Okay, next one is project planning. And this is sort of like usually is making spreadsheets of what you have to do, figuring out all the different parts of what you have to do, and estimating how long it's going to take. I find that every few months I have to do a sort of project planning day where I really sort of take inventory on, okay, what have we done? How much have we gotten done over what amount of time? How much is there to do? What kind of pace are we on? This is of course incredibly important for budgeting. Like seeing how much money you're burning and what kind of track you're on for what release date and all that sort of stuff. So this is important stuff, milestone planning, seeing where you're going to be, like how long is it going to be before we're going to be able to get, X trailer out or whatever. There's a certain joy in it. Sometimes I think it can feel a little bit overwhelming when you're taking inventory like that. There's really only one time when it's fun. That's when you're getting really close to the end and you really can taste, the finish line. Then when you start to look at the list and you're like, okay, we can do this. We're going to finish this thing. But most of the time it just feels like, holy crap, what are we doing? How are we going to get this done? Okay, so next one, this is a very special one. This is porting. And when I say porting, I'm talking about all the things involved in porting, and maybe this category is way too big, but I'm including like platform specific achievements and things like that, optimizations if you've got to like change a shader or something like that, and I'm also including all of the platform specific admin work. So there's all these things you've got to do like on the back ends of the different stores to get a game out. We're talking about like ESRB rating, getting your game certified, which is sort of this crazy technical checklist that the consoles have for all the different sort of little things that your game has to do. Like it has to have a message when your controller gets disconnected or something like that. There's literally thousands of these things, and you just have to make sure that they're all done. And then when you think that they're all done, then you schedule a session where they test the game and tell you if you have checked all of the little boxes. This is an absolutely horrible and loathsome process. Even if you're working with a porting company, I still find it ends up being, a lot of work just for everyone. So porting for me is the worst task imaginable. I really do not like the process of porting. And I ported one game completely myself. That's Leaving Lindau. That's the first game we ever shipped in. It was an incredibly short game. It still took me months. I remember just this one anecdote to sort of paint a picture of how loathsome this can be. One of the platforms, I'll try to be as unspecific as possible, requires a static IP to access their backend, their like developer environment. Now, if you don't know what a static IP is, that's probably because if you called your internet service provider and asked them, hey, could I have a static IP? They would not know what you're talking about. They would be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even know really what that is in this context. You can even ask for their manager and ask them to get you a static IP, and they also will not know what you're talking about. Only like the biggest companies, we're talking about like maybe the Microsoft campus in Redmond has a static IP, and the only way to get a static IP if you're not, this giant commercial operation is usually to get a VPN, which is just so janky. A lot of VPNs will offer like a static IP service. And so the dev kit that I was using to even test if like your achievements are working and stuff, to access the dev environment, that also has to be going through your static IP, in my case, which was a VPN. So you've got to do all this terrible IT work to like get your router to route through the VPN service so that your dev kit can actually test all of the things you need to test. And that alone, I remember, just took me weeks, and there is no help there. There's no YouTube video that you can Google like how to get my, dev console to. These things are just not things that are public. This is all very proprietary. It's all NDA stuff. You've got to dive into all their terrible documentation that has all this proprietary language. Every single platform has a different set of proprietary language where different words mean different things depending on the platform, and there's really difficult to figure out what even they're talking about. Yeah, it's just a whole terrible can of worms. Where you're alone at sea with feels like basically no help. For eShade, we did use a porting house, and that was a much, much better experience than me doing it by my lonesome on leaving Lindau. But even then, I still really dislike it. Okay, so next is audio. And I really, really enjoy doing audio. I think one of the things I enjoy the most about audio is comparatively speaking to all the other game dev tasks, it takes a really small amount of time to make a really huge amount of impact. Like you can actually flesh out an environment in terms of audio, like you're talking to your waterfall sounds, your birds, your wind, whatever, even some footsteps and things like that. That's reasonable to do in a few days. Whereas compared to like authoring the art for an environment, I mean, we're talking months and months of work. So it's really fun to have this impact, really quickly. And for that reason, I put audio in the enjoyable column. Okay, level design and mapping. So this one is, some people call it mapping. I've worked at some studios that called it mapping, where you're basically, creating the environment with props that already exist. So some people call this like set decoration. Some people call it level design, but I'm really thinking about it more from like almost like an art perspective. Just, filling out the environment and making it come to life. This is wonderful. I love this. I absolutely love this. It's one of the most important parts of making your game look good. A lot of people think that a game looks good when all the assets look good, and I couldn't disagree with that more. I think the big read is the most important thing, right? Like you squint your eyes. That is really the biggest emotional impact there. That is probably my favorite part of making game art. And so that's why I love mapping and level design. Okay, optimization covers so many different things, right? Because you've got coding optimization, you've got art optimization, you can optimize your art assets, you can optimize your art pipeline as well. You can maybe be putting different textures onto an atlas or something like that. There's so much that goes into optimization. And in fact, for our last game, eShade, I think that roughly half of all the development hours that went into eShade, I would categorize as optimization. That's how much work it takes to make at least a high fidelity 3D game, especially a first person one. That's how much work it takes to get it not running great, but running to a standard that people will even accept. Because even then, we have had quite a number of complaints about eShade's performance, saying, oops, they forgot to optimize or whatever. The truth is that game took 5 years to make, and over half of that time was spent just on optimization. We're talking about draw call consolidation, we're talking about frustum culling, we're talking about potentially batching or mesh combining, occlusion culling, and all the other different kinds of culling you can do any way you can imagine to not draw the things that you don't need to be drawing. Loads and loads of work. It can be really rewarding, and it can be almost creative in a way when you're thinking about all the different ways that you can, if we if we make this tree two-sided and flip it over, then you might get, two trees out of one, and it would only be like, you could actually like instance that tree, and you would only have like one set of instances. Like there's all these crazy things you can think of. Like in eShade's case, we had all of the foliage in the entire world on a single foliage texture, and that allowed us to combine any piece of vegetation with any other piece of vegetation to consolidate draw calls. There's all these cool tricks that you can do, and it can be fun, but ultimately, I don't want to put it in the love category. I'll put it in the enjoyable category. And the reason I put it, I've demoted it from love, even though it's a puzzle game sort of that I really like, is because it feels like a game that you can't win. It feels like no matter how good a job you do, maybe that's just because we don't have enough money. Like maybe if we had $20 million, then we could make optimization that people would say is good, but you almost never hear about people saying this game is really well optimized. It's always the opposite, where the game is running great, and then, you know, for 10 seconds after playing for an hour, they get a juddery frame rate and people say, oops, they forgot to optimize, lazy devs, you know, that sort of thing. So that takes a little bit of the enjoyment out of it for me. Okay, so now we've got tech art. If you don't know what tech art is, that's technically artistic, but very usually codery in nature. Now that technically artistic, that's not where the word tech art comes from. So tech art is usually like making shaders, potentially making tools for artists, potentially coming up with pipelines for artists, for authoring assets and these sorts of things. I really, really enjoy tech art. I think I'm pretty good at it. I think that it's, you know, it's one of the most highly paid jobs in game development for a reason. I think it's because it's really important, and it's really hard to find people who are artistic enough to make good decisions about these sorts of things, but also technical enough to make good decisions about these sorts of things. And I think it just takes a sort of rare person. And yeah, I think it's something I'm good at. And I think it's part of the reason why we can make these really sort of unique and maybe, dare I say, beautiful looking games, very small team. So I put that one in the love category. It's something I'm passionate about. Okay, and then finally we've got market research. I really enjoy market research. I really enjoy looking at what's selling. I really enjoy coming up with hypothesis about why something is selling, and sort of looking at their marketing strategy, at their marketing beats, at maybe the sort of social media stuff that they're doing. I really enjoy analyzing the sort of content marketing they're doing. Like, oh, cool. Like, you know, what angle were they taking there, or what kinds of things were they talking about that people were enjoying? It's really fun for me. And of course, since we do a lot of content marketing, at least lately, this is fun for me to see what kinds of things other devs are coming up with that they can share that people are really enjoying. So I'm going to go ahead and put market research in enjoyable. Maybe even, do I love market research? Do I love it? I think I'm going to keep it in enjoyable, just because the sense of satisfaction I feel from doing the work is not as high as these other things. These other things feel like this really high satisfaction. Like when I go to bed, I just feel amazing, you know, especially when I've made something, a beautiful piece of 3D art. And maybe I don't feel like that so much from market research, but it is really fun to do, and it's something I'm very interested in. All right, well, that's it. We've got a pretty even list. We've got more things in the green categories here, so that's good. I guess, what can I say? I love my job, so that's a good thing. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, if you like the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the video. And, you know, maybe check out our game. Go check it out. Put a link for it down in the description, and go check it out on Steam and see if maybe it's something that you might enjoy playing, and throw it a wish list if it is. That would mean a lot to us.